Imagine two people who earn nearly the same income, live in the same city, and pay roughly the same bills, yet over time one of them begins to feel calmer, more stable, and much harder to financially knock over, while the other still feels as if every month is a fragile balancing act where one broken phone, one rent increase, or one unexpected expense can throw everything off. The difference often isn't intelligence, and it isn't always income either. Very often, the real difference is whether or not they have crossed a financial threshold, and one of the most important thresholds in modern life is the first $100,000. That number sounds dramatic, almost cliché, but its real power has very little to do with status and almost everything to do with mechanics. $100,000 changes everything, not because it instantly makes someone rich, but because it is often the point where money starts behaving differently. Below that threshold, most of your financial energy is spent defending yourself from life. Above it, at least for many people, some of that same energy can finally start building momentum. Most people think money problems are mainly about income, but what actually controls daily financial stress is margin. Margin is the space between what life costs and what your finances can absorb without panic. When that margin is thin, even a decent paycheck can feel unstable. When that margin becomes wider, life begins to feel less expensive, even if prices have not changed at all. That is why the first 100,000 matters psychologically before it matters socially. Before that threshold, almost every setback feels urgent because there is very little stored force in the system. You are not just paying bills, you are constantly trying to prevent collapse. A car repair, a medical bill, a delayed payment, a family emergency, a laptop replacement, or even a few bad weeks at work can hit with full emotional force when there is no financial cushion behind you. And this is where financial psychology becomes brutally important. People do not make bad money decisions only because they lack discipline. They often make bad decisions because scarcity changes the way the brain works. When money is tight, your attention narrows. You stop thinking strategically and start thinking defensively. You optimize for survival, not architecture. That is not laziness, and it is not failure. It is what pressure does to human decision-making. When you are always close to zero, every mistake becomes expensive. That means every decision feels heavier. Every purchase feels more stressful. Every delay feels dangerous. And ironically, this makes long-term planning harder precisely when it is needed most. It is difficult to think in 5-year horizons when the next 5 days already feel unstable. Now this is where the math changes. If you have $10,000 invested and it grows by 10% in a year, that gives you $1,000. Helpful, but not transformative. If you have $100,000 invested, the exact same 10% becomes $10,000. Suddenly, the system starts moving in a way that feels visible. The percentage is the same, but the lived experience is completely different. This is the moment where money begins to stop feeling like something you must manually drag uphill every single day. Up to that point, almost all progress comes from labor, restraint, and consistency. You work more, save more, cut more, and try harder. But once capital reaches a meaningful size, growth itself begins contributing to the process. It does not replace discipline, and it certainly does not remove risk, but it changes the relationship between effort and momentum. And that is exactly why the first 100,000 is so difficult. It is not only hard because saving is hard, it is hard because the system gives very little visible reward in the early years. You sacrifice, you save, you rebuild, and life keeps trying to take it back. Emergencies happen, inflation happens, bad timing happens, and progress can feel painfully unimpressive for a long time. That discouragement is one of the biggest reasons people quit before compounding has a chance to become real. Historically, this pattern shows up everywhere. In older economies, the threshold might have been land, livestock, tools, or inventory. In modern financial life, the threshold is often investable capital large enough to create noticeable movement on its own. The tools have changed, but the rule has not. Systems reward people differently once they cross certain structural lines. That is why $100,000 matters far beyond the spreadsheet. It often marks the point where someone begins participating in the economy with a different level of resilience. They are still vulnerable, still human, and still exposed to bad luck, but they are no longer meeting every shock with zero stored force behind them. And perhaps the biggest change is invisible. Once you have enough stored capital, you stop needing every financial decision to work immediately. That changes everything. It gives you patience, it gives you breathing room, it gives you the ability to recover from mistakes instead of being defined by them. So no, $100,000 is not magic, and it does not guarantee wealth, freedom, or perfect security. But it often marks the first point where money begins to build momentum instead of just absorbing damage, where compounding starts to feel real instead of theoretical, and where life becomes less about constant defense and more about quiet stability. That is why $100,000 changes everything, not because it makes you rich, but because it changes the physics of financial life.